so much for being back with us tonight. If you were here last night, if you weren't, thank you for joining us tonight. Last night I played a song called Does God, and tonight I wanted to play something different. And so we talked a lot about Christian nationalism last night, which is kind of the background I came from. And so this song, this is the song I wrote the day after the 2016 election. And it was kind of like the last straw for me. And so I didn't want to open with this song because it's a bit of a downer, but it comes from this place of pain and feeling like the people that had raised me and instilled me with the teachings of Jesus Christ had turned their back on those teachings, maybe without realizing it. But it stuck with me enough to know that it wasn't right. And so I wrote the song. It's called Recover. Deconstructed these walls and I found a business where the company line was the only way to get paid. We built a church on certainty that fears everything against it, where the refugee suffers and the white man has it made. I won't do it anymore. It's taken me too long to recover. I'll go feed the sick and poor, try to help the world to recover. I sat myself in your pews every single week, and I gave you my money so that you would tell me what to think. And I learned from a book that you had taken my heart out of. And that's how I learned to make exclusion look like love. I won't do it anymore. It's taken me too long to recover. I'll go feed the sick and poor, try to help the world to recover.
I'm sorry, you wrote that song? Dude, I've been listening to you for like a year.
You didn't know that was me?
No!
Amazing.
No, I heard that song like last January or something. And I was like, dang, this guy's voice, kind of hate him. Wow, okay, so that's cool. So I'm friends with like a hero of mine, that's pretty cool. Yeah, true story. All right, I'm gonna sing a song now. My turn. I wrote this song for my kids a few weeks ago. I think at the end of the day, really, we're doing this for our kids. We're doing this for our grandkids. We're doing this for the future. And I don't know about you. I assume you're with me. I'm really, really worried. Like not even necessarily about Trump winning or Supreme Court justices, blah blah blah. But we're at a place that we've never been in the history of the human species. Since 1945, we've had the ability to just destroy ourselves in the most literal sense. And it, obviously we had some close calls, Cuban Missile Crisis and whatnot, but it just seems like we're getting closer and closer with the decisions we're making right now, whether it's nuclear weapons or AI or climate change. The decisions we make in the next 5 or 10 years are gonna impact. It's not hyperbole, and it's not a metaphor to say this is for our kids. So I wrote this song for my kids. They have these friends that they hang out with all the time. Their names are Sam and Alex and Rowan and Kala and Isaiah. And then there's this little Frenchy dog named Opal. And Opal's just like part of the family. My kids are Piper, Aiden, and Noah. And this is kind of specific to my region of New York, but we're kind of in the Great Lakes region as well, and there's a lot of Great Lakes references in here, so insert your own grandkids, kids here. Piper and Sam, Aiden and Alex and Noah, Opal the Frenchie and Rowan and Cal and Isaiah. Summer of love and the beauty between Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida. You are the ones who must care for this land and her waters. Burned over districts from hundreds of years of revival. Underground railroads brought freedom and life, made us vital. Let justice roll down like the rivers that empty into the mist of Niagara. You are the ones who must care for this land and her daughters. None of us are free until all of us are free. We can only be as free as the world is allowed to be green, allowed to grow wild and free. Children arrive and we try to build hope for their futures. Always remember the trees are your mothers and sisters. One day we'll let go enough to be free as the eagles and beavers and otters. You are the ones who must care for the sky and her waters. So Piper and Sam, Aiden and Alex and Noah, Opal the Frenchie and Calla and Rowan, Isaiah. Summer of love and the beauty between Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida. You are the one who must care for this land and her waters. That's really great. Thanks, Joel. Some of the context of what Joel was getting at when he said to Forrest Clay, who we also just called Clay, you wrote that song? It's because these guys met each other in July at an event that we did. Joel hooked up with us in our little traveling band of Okama Do-Gooders after a festival that we were at in North Carolina, and said he's going to come along. And then Forrest Clay, came to a couple of events there in Ohio near where he lives. So they just met and didn't have a chance to connect. And there's another person that travels with us, who's also one of our musicians, named Dan. And all three of these, Dan's from Michigan, Texas, and now New York, Ohio. Similar ages, and 10 years ago, all of them were in churches that would have reflected a Christian nationalist perspective. Grew up in that, were successful in it. We're all worship leaders in those places, singing songs, traveling the country, traveling with organizations, traveling with a band, articulating a view that they kind of understood, but it was firmly inside of one narrative. And then things happened, and they changed. And as Dan would, if he were here, Dan would put it, now they sing sad dad songs about a new way of life as 40-year-old men or 38-year-old men that are trying to figure out what do they do now. I say all that for a little moment of encouragement. Whatever this last 10 years has brought, which has been a lot of pain to a lot of people, it's also created a context in which a lot of people are moving and changing. So if someone tells you religious people hardwired into Christian nationalism and all the rest of it won't change, can't change, don't change, I promise you they do. We meet them every day. People who said, a few months ago, a few years ago, I was over there. Now I'm here and I don't know what to do. And one of the great things about traveling with musicians who do this, they are figuratively, metaphorically, and literally writing new songs to sing a new song. Every social movement has music at its heart. We need our troubadours, our musicians, to join together with our organizers and our leaders and our funders and bus drivers and center runners and grandparents and brothers and sisters to all make a new world. So that's what's up, that's what's going on. So that's what was happening up there. I love this kind of stuff. If you have the privilege to come with us, and we'll be back here, I think we're back here around the 19th of October, and then we're back here again at the end of October in this area doing events. There will be a bunch of other people with us. Maybe some of you, and you'll meet some new people who we've gathered up along the way. Some people who are kind of coming and going, because I promise you this, people are wandering around the country trying to answer this question. What do we do in a pluralistic society as a person of faith? What do we do about those? It's a very basic question. If you don't want Christian nationalism or Jewish nationalism or Hindu nationalism or Buddhist nationalism, you don't want Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Islam to be excluded from public life, but you don't want it to run the show, how do we do that? As I mentioned last night, this is a very American question. So we're going to talk about this tonight. Bob's going to come up in a moment. We're going to have a little bit of time. We're going to have three parts to all of this. One of those is, how do religious leaders respond to these questions? How do some politicians respond to these questions? And how do just ordinary citizens respond to it? So that's going to sort of structure three responses. And I'll do a little setup here before Bob comes up on what's going on with the question of what do we do with faith in a pluralistic society. I mentioned last night that our 248 plus years as a nation, the struggle of what do we do with faith in our society has been a constant. Right? If you were around last night, you might remember that Michael was here to describe the difficult and tumultuous relationship we've had with the role of religion in our country. And religion
has been used on every side of issues. It was the basis for Southern state slavery. It was the basis for Northern state abolitionist movements. It was the basis for union organizing, and it's become the basis for stopping union organizing. It has been the basis for caring for our land and for exploiting the land. Religious narratives are used by all the groups for their purposes. That's just a fact. You can dig it up everywhere. Some people only grew up in a religious world that had one political view. Other people have had many political views take hold of the faith that they've held. So it's not clear that just one side wants to use religion in a particular way and the other side doesn't want to use religion in any particular way. In the United States, Christian nationalism, as we like to say, is about the government advocating for, deriving its authority from, or granting privilege to the Christian faith. That's our basic core description of what is Christian nationalism. Now, it's more than that. Sometimes it's rooted in white racism, sometimes it's rooted in power, sometimes it's rooted in particular takeover of school boards or of county commissions. But it basically always has this assumption built into it, that Christianity is the default, that a government should be advocating for Christians and giving them extra privilege, and fundamentally Christian nationalists believe the government derives its authority from biblical text interpreted by Christians in particular ways. Okay, so that's sort of the baseline. But the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, to take us back again to 6th grade social studies class, the preamble reads like this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident." If a good, solid historian were here, they would say that preamble starts out with a really big point. These truths that we're about to articulate are self-evident. As compared to what? Brought by God. Divinely revealed. Not divinely revealed. Not hidden in Scripture. Self-evident. The Declaration of Independence was declaring independence from England, a Christian nationalist nation, we'll talk about that in a moment, who was telling the colonies that God said they could not separate. And they said, we don't agree with your divine interpretation, and we say the opposite of the divine is driving this. They say this: it is self-evident that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That this Creator who did this is self-evident and is not mediated, in their language, by any religion or by any divine edict. Whatever the Creator has created. And by the way, to all my Christian nationalist friends who might be watching our recording of this, you're not allowing a single signer of the Declaration of Independence to use this as a profession of faith that would be legitimate to participate in your church. General Creator language, you might as well be saying the universe in modern day. This is deistic language from the 18th century, right? Okay, that to secure these rights, the governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. These truths are self-evident, not divinely revealed, and receive their just powers from the consent of the governed. They don't receive their power from the divine. They don't receive their power from Scripture. The preamble to the Declaration was an argument against what was going on in England that wanted to say that the divine had put the kings in places of authority. And they're like, nope, that is not the story as we see it. That any form of government becomes destructive to these ends. The people can alter or abolish it and institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. The people and not the gods. That's the argument coming out of this. Now, the First Amendment to our Constitution, we talked about that last night. It is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So after the Declaration of Independence, then there's the creation of a constitution after the Revolutionary War. And when they put the Constitution into place, it comes with some amendments. And the very first one is the amendment to say, let's be clear about whether we're going to have an official religion in America or not. We are not. It's called the Establishment Clause. That little word, establishment, is a big deal. You might be familiar with that word. When I was in elementary school, that was referred to as the longest word in the English language, anti-disestablishmentarianism. Remember that word as the longest word in the English language? Do you know that anti-disestablishmentarianism is Christian nationalism? Okay, here's how it works. The anti-disestablishmentarianism. The thing that was argued in England, in the country of England, where religion was established with the government. The government's basis was based on the Christian church, the Church of England. There was a movement in England to disestablish the church from the government. They wanted to do what the United States was talking about doing, was disestablishing. But then there was an anti-disestablishment movement. So one group of people said, we have an established government and an established religion. We want to separate religion from the government, disestablish them. Then there was a group saying, we're against the disestablishment. That's anti-disestablishmentarianism. So when the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was coming into being, in England and around the world, people were arguing about the role of government and religion. All of that to say, this is as American as it gets. So where does the individual's religious commitment end and the relationship to their public life? Where does it begin and where does it end? How do we do this? Okay, we might say, let's not have any rules that say you have to be this or you can't be that religion. Fair enough. But after that, then what? Just elect a bunch of people from one religion and then all of those people decide on county laws based on Amish faith, Jewish faith, Methodist faith? If you're going to do that, I'll tell you who really wants in on that game. It's the Presbyterians. They are ready to go. The Presbyterians have a rule for everything. They are organized under a particular Robert's Rules of Order, and they are ready to go. So there's a lot of different groups who could say, let's just elect a bunch of people like us, and then we'll pass laws. But we said in the Constitution, nope, you don't get to do that anywhere, no matter who is elected. But how you navigate that? What if the Supreme Court had, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 Supreme Court justices who are avowed Catholics? And they're interpreting the U.S. Constitution and laws through their Catholic theology. Is that the establishment of religion? Do we get to have Catholics? I'll tell you one of the things the founders would have said. Catholics? You gotta be kidding. They didn't even want Catholics to be citizens at the founding of this nation, right? They were a persecuted religious group. Now they're running the Supreme Court in a way that some people feel like is way over the line into a particular religious understanding. We've had times where there were no Catholics on the Supreme Court. Now a great majority of Catholics are on the Supreme Court. Is that okay? Is it not okay? Where does it begin? Where does it end? How do we handle all this? This is a deep American question that we're trying to figure out. Where does religious freedom start and religious tyranny end? Well, that's the kind of thing that we're going to want to be talking about tonight. Now, we will say at Vote Common Good that the common good is the thing that America could organize around. shouldn't organize around religion, we should organize around some self-evident sense of common good. An argument is that all religious traditions contribute to common good. That is something we could organize around. So we have a thing that's on a piece on a card back there that describes all this. Bob, I think anticipated it, got up and said.
I gave them all away.
You may have given them all away. I bet we have more stored away in that bus out there somewhere. But here's what it reads. Here's how we articulate this. When the Hebrew Scriptures says to treat the alien and the refugee as you would want to be treated because God desires compassion for the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the vulnerable, they're calling people to seek common good. When Jesus says to love your neighbor as you love yourself, and when Paul says not to seek your own interests, but also the interests of others, and when John and James say that no one can say they love God or have faith in God if they fail to demonstrate their love for their neighbor, they call people to seek the common good. When the Quran says that one is a believer, is not a believer until they desire for their brother or sister what they desire for themselves, and teaches that God made us different so that the world would seek to understand and know one another, the Quran calls humanity to seek the common good. When great leaders of Sikhism say to value others as you would value yourself and to avoid creating enmity with anyone because God is within everyone. The Taoists say to regard your neighbor's gain or loss as your own. When the Buddhists and Hindus say not to hurt others in ways that you would find hurtful. When secular humanists advocate for the principle of reciprocity, they call humans kind to seek the common good. This means that good-hearted Christians, Jews, Muslims, people of faith and no faith, and all traditions cannot simply vote for what is best for themselves as individuals, or even what is best for their religion, their party, their race, their nation alone, but they must be concerned about the common good. Or to put it differently, selfish people of every religion and tradition vote for self-interest and partisan interests alone, but good people of every religion vote the common good. So there's got to be a way that we can include religious and non-religious people in the creation of the common good. Our suggestion is many of us were told if you went to a high school or college where you had to write a term paper. And the term paper rules said you had to have 2 sources for any argument you were going to make. We think that's a good way for us to think about how we're going to pass laws. If your religious tradition teaches you something, and you can't find anywhere else in non-religious world that also argues for that, then perhaps you shouldn't put it into law. If you can't find a corresponding secular argument, then it doesn't rise to the level to be enforced by our federal, state, county, or local governments. I think this is the helpful way for us to think about how we are driven by our morals, because for a lot of people what happens to them is they're like, but I was taught to be a good moral person and I see the world through my faith, so how do I set all that aside to go and be a representative? Well, if the only thing you have is your teaching from your church or from your interpretation of the Bible or your interpretation of what the Spirit of God has told you, it might not be of the quality to be in law in the United States. Now, there's some things that would be very simple, right? Like communion, Eucharist is a really big deal in a lot of Christian traditions. But nobody wants the county government, interpreting what's going to happen to bread and wine, right? After it's been put into service of a Christian community. Now, we might want to say what we should do with your motor oil. Don't just dump it in the grass. But we're probably not going to say that about the wine or about the juice, or for the Mormons about the water that's used in communion or Eucharist. Because it just sort of seems self-evident that, well, okay, all right, we're not going to do it when it comes to what we do with that liquid in a church service. But we certainly want to do it with oil that you're dumping after you change your oil in your car. So where do we decide that line? Sometimes it's really obvious. What about other more important social issues? What about the funding of certain activities? Should those be funded? If they only serve a religious tradition and not a broader secular purpose. So what it requires, and this is hard for a lot of religious people, is religious people have to start thinking about what does non-religious moral argument call them to. And I'll be blunt that most churches, most Christian communities, don't spend time teaching their adherents how to think like a secular person so that they can come up with a secular argument that might be similar to their religious conviction. And we should be doing that. In other words, we should be catechizing or teaching or Sunday schooling people into understanding secular thought and not only religious thought. So this is the kind of project that I think we're missing in the United States that could go a long way. Yes?
I just want to point out that you pointed out to us there are 5 Catholic judges on the Supreme Court, and they're interpreting through their Catholic theology, and they're not theologians, although we're all theologians, you know, really, but their theology is not my theology, and it's not everybody's, you know, Catholicism. And I'll point out that our president, Joe Biden, is a practicing Catholic, attends Mass every week, all his life, and he does not agree
That's right.
with that theology or the worldview of those judges. So Catholicism itself
Yes.
is meant to be so big and so broad, non-exclusive, all welcoming. I mean, we don't really get it, but when you say there's 5 Catholic judges, but they don't express my
That's right.
Catholicism.
Yeah, this is the struggle for anybody who argues for a religious community to have more influence in a society is which version of that community. Inside of Catholicism, there's a wide range of theological and social implication views. Inside of Protestantism, an enormously wide. And then inside of the global expressions of all of those, there's even more. So religion, and especially I'll speak to the Christian religion because I know that one most personally and intimately and professionally, it can do a lot of really good things. I think the Christian faith can be a great source of driving people to human care and common good, but it doesn't work very well as an organizing principle for a nation.
Right.
It's just not made of that substance. That's not what it was for.
Right.
When we know the limits of our faith,
Right.
and here's a hard thing because for a lot of people, especially I don't know how they talk about it in all Catholic traditions, but in the Protestant tradition, it's really common to say these phrases like having a biblical worldview. I've heard people say a Catholic worldview, this kind of thing, like, whoa, like the Bible can do a lot of things, but as the first screen by which you understand the world, there's just a whole lot of things that aren't in there. I've been a Christian since I was 16 years old and involved professionally my entire adult life, and I'll tell you, it tells you absolutely nothing about how to make a C7 chord on a guitar. It's absolutely useless. I've been through the entire Christian tradition, have a master's of divinity. Doesn't help you play the guitar. Just a lot of things it doesn't help you do. It doesn't help you figure out what you should do with processing immigrants at the border. It's just not specific enough. Welcome your neighbor. Yes, welcome the immigrant, of course, but what are we going to use for a processing system? Do you think we should be doing that through Homeland Security or through Health and Human Services? Now, I make a big argument in our work that Health and Human Services from the federal government should be in charge of first contact at the border and not Homeland Security. Homeland Security is the worst. Well, the Bible's not going to describe that to us.
Right.
So we have to be more secular in order to be more faithful in a democracy. This is just the beautiful irony of all this.
You know, and like Kamala Harris names it as values. I mean, people have named it that way.
Yes.
It's values.
Yes.
People over profit.
Yes.
The needs of the people over big money and big power.
Yes.
Look at the needs of the people.
Yes.
That's what.
And that becomes the mantra and the call for a lot of us, and then how we put that into action starts to get real complicated. And look, this is also very Christian in the Christian tradition, in the Jewish tradition. The rabbis used to sit around doing this in what in rabbinic thought's called midrash. Jesus was very much into this in the Gospels, people coming up like, okay, so we got a question for you. I'm supposed to love my neighbor, but who is my neighbor? And then Jesus is like, you know those Samaritans, the people that you were taught to hate, the people that were not really Jews and aren't really Gentiles because they, decades and centuries ago, married together and did the thing that the Israelites said they weren't supposed to do? Those people, the Samaritans, let me tell you about a good one of those. The people you hate, let me tell you about the good Samaritan. Go and do what the good Samaritan does. People are like, there are no good Samaritans. So how we do this should implicate us, but the practical way that we're going to lead a government, it's not there. In fact, when it comes to the Bible, you want to start digging into Levitical law, and you're going to have a hard time having a little queso, right? Because you're not supposed to mix your meats and your dairy. So nobody's advocating for a national movement of Hasidic Judaism. Even Hasidic Jews are like, no, that's not for all y'all. That's just for us. So the laws that we find in our scriptures, they're not designed for this. This is true across the board for every religion. All right, so how do religious leaders take on this issue? Bob and I will take this after I show you a little bit of an example. This fella is from southern Texas. He is a Hispanic leader who is a Christian nationalist. It's easy for people to think that Christian nationalists are also white nationalists. And there are many Christian nationalists who are white nationalists, and many white nationalists who are Christian nationalists, and many Christian nationalists who are not white nationalists, and many white nationalists who are not Christian nationalists. There's a huge movement of Christian nationalism inside the Hispanic church and the black church in America. That comes as a shock to a lot of people, but it's true. This particular guy supported a candidate running in southern Texas, a border town, a border region in Texas, who won a special election 2 years ago. They launched a campaign called MAGA, Make America Godly Again. Representative Flores ran on that campaign, started in his church, and this is what you're about to see, is an short bit of an MSNBC interview about this whole movement. You can watch the whole hour-long documentary on MSNBC about what's going on. So you're going to see an interpretation of how pastors in the Christian nationalist world take this on, and then Bob and I are going to talk about other ways that pastors can talk about this. So here he is.
You know that Thomas Jefferson said that you couldn't even call yourself a Christian, an American, if you weren't a God-fearing Christian. And we're going to proclaim that this nation belongs to you, God. Like it was founded in 1776, Lord. Lord, we pray for the supremacy of God in this nation again.
How involved do you think someone like you should actually be in politics and in guiding policy?
Oh, I think we need to. I mean, like I said, this nation was founded under God, and so we've gone away from that. The church has.
But the nation, in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't give any partiality to Christianity. In fact, the opposite, right? And how do you reconcile those two things?
There's freedom of religion, but at the same time, they understood that this whole foundation was built on the Word of God. If we understood it, they don't want to force it on you, but they understood, okay, this Constitution will be built. They used 27 scriptures to form the Constitution.
But Thomas Jefferson, who you quoted on stage to your audience, he's very much the one that believed in the separation between church and state. So again,
But you know, it's funny because that separation of church always comes up. But it was never a law, and that's the thing. Like as a pastor, I just wanted to tell pastors it's okay to talk about politics in your church. You won't get in trouble. Thank you, Jesus.
In Cabrera's view, Mayra Flores is the beginning of something much bigger.
Thank you, Jesus. And devil, we're going to kick you out. Kick you out of our cities, kick States and kick you out of this nation and kick you out of that White House in the name of Jesus.
When you say something like the states belong to Judah, or the states belong to Christianity, is that not dangerous?
How am I being a danger to society if I'm preaching what the Bible teaches and all we want to do is just...
Politicians are elected to serve the people, right?
Exactly.
To serve everybody, not to serve a God.
Yeah, but hold on, but we are electing them. So they're representing us.
And there's also Muslims that elect them. And
Yeah,
there's,
exactly.
I mean,
So that's what I'm saying. So now, as a voice, as a church, we have a right to vote for whoever we want to vote for. So, but if we don't use that voice, then what's the point then? Then we're not doing our jobs as Christians to vote for people that have our values. When you're born again, like, your mentality changes. I don't think like a Latino no more. I think like a man of God.
are there any candidates that Make America Godly Again has endorsed?
Myra was just the beginning. It was just, I mean, she opened the door for other people to walk through.
I mean, you yourself were there during her inauguration.
Exactly.
And if I remember correctly, you told Speaker Pelosi that you wanted to take this country back
Yes,
for God.
that's right. And that was, let me tell you, it was, if I died today, it was worth it.
From the United States Capitol to the Rio Grande Valley, messages like Make America Godly Again are reaching thousands of Latino churchgoers.
Okay. Wow. All right, so Bob, you can grab that mic.
Okay.
You're okay. Maybe if the, mind that cable. It's an interesting conversation, right? Can you feel where this pastor is a little bit confused and isn't sure how to hold all these things, and he's tried to work out how you get to be a pastor, and the foundation of the Constitution was the Bible, and it was really a Christian thing. And then she's saying, yeah, no, it's not. He's like, yeah, kind of not, but it is, right? And then we elect them, but how do we, you can feel the pressure in there. You can feel the struggle going on. So Bob, what comes to your mind when you saw that interview and you think about this?
Well, definitely that he's confused and he's attempting to portray himself as a high priest and preacher.
Yeah.
But just a very quick backing up and give you a little bit of background. When I first met Doug, he was a pastor and I was an evangelical theologian. I was a seminary professor in Texas at one of the leading evangelical schools. And I, during that time, was always arguing against some of the practices that I was seeing in churches in Texas. For example, when the congregation on July 4th would stand and pledge allegiance within the church. And I would speak against that and tell them, if you really believe that God is the creator and above all, why are you making God stoop to align God with a particular nation? You know, that's not the place for this. Those things don't go together. And I had a good friend at the time that told me if I said that to her family in West Texas, that they would shoot me. And they might have.
Yeah.
You know, because that would have been seen as betrayal. But that voice is no longer a marginalized joke. It's pretty mainstream. But during that time, I was concerned about things that I was seeing. But since that time, I have seen them very differently. Somewhere along the line, I returned to the question, as they might say in Judaism, that to find an answer, to be converted is to find an answer, and to go the other direction is to return to the question. And so somewhere in there, I returned to the question. I left that school not long after I met Doug, not because of his influence, but because I just couldn't do it anymore. That world became way too narrow for me. And I couldn't stay there. I wasn't laughing at the jokes. They were no longer my people. After doing a couple of years of peace building work in sub-Saharan Africa, I came here to Green Bay and was at St. Norbert College for the last 15 years. I'm now program director here at the Mauthe Center. So in all of that broader ecumenical work, I also changed my academic expertise in a sense and was no longer a professor of theology. In fact, they didn't really trust me to teach theology here. But what I did begin teaching was human rights. And so just to, again, backfill a little bit of my connection to these questions. When you think about what is the common good, it seems to me that one of the more easily identified areas of common good is in the common agreements around human rights. That becomes for us a way to talk about justice. You know, justice is not just how I feel things ought to be. It ought to be a way of describing what people have together identified as justice. And so the history of human rights includes all kinds of religious voices. So, for example, the right to property goes back to some of the old religious, and even back before that to Hammurabi, proclamations not to steal one another's property. There's an implied right to property. The right to life, long before it became a slogan of anti-abortion advocates, was the right to not get assaulted while you're walking down the street. It's the right to bodily integrity. And so those rights were implied in religious teaching for centuries. But also, as you were, I love the description when you're talking about the couple of sources. You know, when you get into Enlightenment philosophy and they're describing essentially a rationale for right to life and a right to not be tortured and a right to bodily integrity, bodily autonomy, they gave shared, more secular, more philosophically rational defenses of things that had been understood for a really long time. Now, fast forward a little bit into the 20th century, and when they were talking in the UN about, in the incipient UN, as it's just forming, coming on the heels of the Second World War, coming on the heels of the Holocaust, when they were talking about putting together a human rights declaration, UNESCO sent out surveys, and they sent them out to really notable leaders, like Gandhi got one, right? Be nice. I mean, if you've been around, you'd have gotten one.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Yeah, I mean, Doug gets a survey in the mail from UNESCO, right? Yeah, you and Gandhi. And basically they said, you know, what do you believe to be?
They crowdsourced it.
Yeah, they crowdsourced it. Yeah, some of the essential human rights. And they had already worked out a few things and asked for their feedback on those. But essentially, when they put this together, one of the philosophers who was behind it, Jacques Maritain, said, in the summary document, he said, we have come to significant agreement so long as you don't ask us why.
That's great.
Isn't that great?
That's great.
And so this is the common good. You know, you might say, I believe in this because I'm Christian. Somebody else might say, I believe in this because I'm Muslim.
Yes.
Somebody else might say, well, I believe in it because to me it's just common sense.
Yes.
But the reality is these are shared agreements.
Yeah.
And that becomes the bedrock, that shared understanding, together with that history of all these arguments, for what becomes a human rights tradition. So when you talk about the common good and what we should support together, we're often talking about human rights. So back now to say, what is it that governments do? Governments are supposed to protect the welfare of their citizens, defined broadly in terms of human rights.
Yeah.
And so the thing that religious people have always been able to do in that regard is to contribute to that conversation. So I always think of Jimmy Carter as an example. I mean, Jimmy Carter is one of a president we were talking about before who brought human rights vocabulary into common use in the U.S. You can see it rhetorically that he's the one that highlighted a lot of this language. But Jimmy Carter would say that his faith drove him to participate in Habitat for Humanity, to participate through the Carter Center in the annihilation, really, of guinea worm disease, things like this. He would say this is an expression of his faith. Somebody else might do those same things and say, I'm doing it because I'm just a good guy.
A different why.
Yeah, a different why. But they're doing the same thing.
Yes.
And in that regard, he is has contributed immensely to human flourishing. And he would say it's because of his faith. On the other hand, some people would say, as they would say an expression of their faith, take that hat off your head.
Yeah.
You know, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. And rather than making your world bigger, rather than contributing to human flourishing, they are making worlds smaller, more constrictive. They're imposing behaviors and beliefs on other people and making their world narrower. What I always say is, keep that one to yourself. Okay, you're perfectly free to believe that. Don't ask the government to enforce it. And just, you know, if that's your belief that people shouldn't wear hats, and, you know, just keep it to yourself.
Yeah. But then you walk in the courtroom, all of a sudden the judge says, you're taking the hat off because inside this courtroom, right? So, and this is what we're navigating all the time, right? Is so within this world, the areas of struggle are power, boundaries, and order. That's what we fundamentally start getting after, right? Who gets to determine and for what rationale? And if a judge just tells you in a courtroom, you're going to do this, well,
yeah, I'm not.
we decided the judge gets to be in charge of the courtroom.
Yeah, and I'm not dressed appropriately for court. You know, I got neither one of us. You know,
and in that sense, we set aside some liberty in order to participate in a legal system like this, and this is the struggle all the time.
But
who has the power? Who has the boundaries?
Yes, it doesn't have to be a struggle because we, as you said, the judge has authority over her courtroom, right? And so one way to think of that is that's their sphere, that's their space. They have legitimate but limited authority in that space. There are things they can make you do, like take off your hat. That's very legitimate. There are things they cannot make you do, like sacrifice an animal in front of the bench. Okay, they can't do that,
Yes, that's
right?
That's great.
Right. So they have legitimate but limited authority.
Right.
And another way to describe it is that I am free to swing my arm pretty much anywhere I want until the free motion of my arm smacks up against his face. Now I have encroached upon his freedom, his bodily integrity, with the exercise of my freedom. I have crossed a line. And so another way to think of that is that sphere sovereignty. Yeah. This is my little sphere. Parents have legitimate but limited authority in their homes.
Yep, there you go.
So a parent can dress their kid. They can put clothes out for their kid to wear. And they have also with that responsibilities. They have a responsibility to feed their children. They have a responsibility to protect their children, to keep their children safe. If they abdicate their responsibilities or they over-exercise what they believe to be their authority, they have done the same thing within their home that I have done by swinging my arm and smacking you in the face. And some other authority has to help.
Yeah.
So a parent has legitimate authority, but it's limited. And if they get outside of that authority and interfere in the flourishing of that child that is their trust, then it is, in many cases, the government's responsibility, looking out for the health and welfare of their citizens, to enter that home and rescue that child. And so that's really how it works.
Always navigating.
Yeah, we need to think about all these things. And so in churches, they have legitimate but limited authority. So they can, talk about all kinds of crazy stuff, honestly.
Yeah.
But if they start start saying that you should overthrow the government, sorry, you just crossed that line.
Yeah, or you
No.
can't build your property up against somebody else's property.
Exactly.
That violates your code, because
Exactly.
your religion doesn't give you a pass on this or that. And that's the real struggle in all of this work for faith leaders. You can see it in the man who we had in the video, and you see it in a lot of faith leaders, because what they fundamentally believe in more conservative religious groups, not just in Christianity, I mean,
Yeah.
your thoughts on this, tend to do this. They speak of the faith as if it is all encompassing, right? Like it is the thing that is the entire worldview. We saw the illustration last night where they were like, we have authority from God that is greater than the authority from our government, right? They're like beyond the government. They think that their faith has filled them to a point of authority that goes beyond the government. They don't have to listen to what they would consider to be a renegade, runaway, non-constitutional government who wants them to wear a mask or kids to stay 6 feet apart in school or something like this. So the question for a lot of religious leaders is, how do you actually how do you teach a faith that is hearty, full, driving you, but also isn't above every other
Yeah, exactly.
power that exists in the world?
Exactly. And one of the ways that I like to think about that is, you want to be the one in charge. How would you feel about someone else being that? And you alluded to that before. I have to say, I had a donor who was not altogether happy with some of the people that we were bringing into town. And
Here or Texas?
Here.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And
I thought that was just an old story.
No, this is a new story. This is a new story. And I said, you know, what Doug Pagitt and Vote Common Good are doing is arguing against theocracy. I said, you're not for theocracy, are you? No. Well, no, I don't think so. And I said, I mean seriously,
Yeah.
you don't want to have the government telling you what you can do and have to do in religious services, do you? You don't want to have the government, well, how would you like it if you had a Protestant president telling you that you can't go to Mass?
Yes.
How would you like it if you had a Catholic president saying you had to go to Mass?
Yeah.
You know, you don't want that, do you? And she said, no, I don't want that. I said, well, then you're against theocracy too.
Yes.
No, we're against the same, we're recognizing that no religion has a monopoly on truth,
Yes.
or is the one that can be equated with government power. And in reality, you look at history, and religions have often made this mistake of aligning with government power.
Mm-hmm.
We all like power.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to have power.
Yes.
But it comes with responsibility, right? But they have made this mistake of aligning with power. And it's a mistake called Constantinism, and that's how old it goes, and it even probably goes back older. And the bottom line is, if you are in bed with the emperor, and the emperor is assassinated, you are in deep water.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the position they're
Yeah.
trying to get themselves in.
Let's use it as a transition into this one. How do politicians respond to this? I want to give you an illustration of modern day political blending. So if you have a pastor saying, we are the church in charge of the Constitution, then you have politicians doing stuff like this. So what I'm about to show you, some of you might remember this face. This fella was a senator and then was the Attorney General of these United States of America, and he's standing behind a podium as the Attorney General speaking on behalf of the Justice Department, making an announcement about the United States invoking family separation at the U.S. border as a deterrent to families coming to the United States legally seeking asylum, by saying, if you exercise your legal right and cross into the United States and ask for asylum, the cost of that will be separating parents from their children while we process your claim. They said explicitly, we're doing this to desincentivize people from coming to the United States seeking this claim. That's what he's announcing right here.
How cruel.
But that's not even the worst of what he does, because he's Jeff Sessions, and this guy can just outdo himself time and time again. So here's what he actually said.
I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified.
Okay, couldn't let him go on any longer. Yes, it is immoral. Yes, it is unjustified. At every level, it's against U.S. law, it's against international law, it's immoral. But he did
It's
three
against human
things
rights.
there, against human rights law. He did three things. He started by saying, by the way, I want to cite to you the Apostle Paul. The Attorney General of the United States invoked Romans chapter 13 as the basis of the authority of the law that he represents. That is Christian nationalism. This is why certain people supported the Trump administration and continue to. That in and of itself was disqualifying to a person.
And that's abuse of children.
It's separate from the issue of what's going on. Him using the Bible as the rationale for whatever law. If he had finished it by saying, therefore we should open the borders and let children in, I would be standing here saying to you, that is not how you invoke a law in the United States. And then he does the very thing that we were advocating for and says, orderly processes is good in and of itself. Right. So he uses both arguments. I want to commend to you my authority from the Apostle Paul, and it's just generally good to have orderly conduct, and to your point, it doesn't actually hurt children. It absolutely hurts children. It is just utter madness, all in the package. And I got to tell you, this is happening in state attorneys generals around the country. It's happening in counties. It's happening in library boards, this kind of stuff. It has run rampant, and the fact that this little clip is not something that the media even cared about. Yeah. The only reason I have it is I actually watched it happen on my own TV and got up and started yelling to my wife, about stuff. Now I just travel around the country and yell at strangers about it.
When you started saying this little, I thought you were talking about Jeff Sessions. I thought something else was coming. There's so much going on in that. He's using Romans 13 to claim that you should always obey the government, which is, of course, not what the U.S. Revolution did. But even further, that is the same scripture that they used to defend slaves obeying masters too. And so they said that it's a God-ordained government. You need to follow it. Don't try to change it. Don't try to overthrow it. And that's why they use that to defend what they call the Southern way of life.
That's why the preamble to the Constitution was, it's self-evident, it's not divinely. That was the argument they were making them, and the argument against slavery in the United States was also not only religious, but also self-evidence.
And to you, it's fine to have religious influences on laws. Okay, it's fine that religious people can speak as part of the general public about why they believe certain things. It's fine to be a participant in democracy. And again, some religious laws ultimately translated into more secularly defended human rights law. Yeah. But, again, this government cannot act on the basis of specifically religious law. So another example would be the hanging of the Ten Commandments in a court. Okay? It's fine to do that as long as you don't mean it. Right? It's fine to have it as a historical marker, just like you could also have Hammurabi on the other wall. You could totally do that. You could have a summary of Quranic law. You could, why pick just Hebrew scripture? You could put all kinds of things on it if you want, for historical interest.
Yes.
But if the judge squints from the bench and says, let's see, what that one said? Oh yeah, that. Okay, this is what we got to do. No, now it's
says you're not committing adultery. We should probably make adultery illegal.
Yeah, now it's a violation of the US Constitution. And so a judge is enforcing the Constitution, not that law. No, and that's really the point. And also, even our coinage, it says, "In God we trust," but the Supreme Court has ruled the only reason it can say, "In God we trust," is that we don't mean it.
Yes.
It's symbolic of, it's a
That is so
token.
genius, Bob. And in addition to that, the Ten Commandments is a great argument for this. Because if you know your Ten Commandments, in fact, can anyone recite all 10 of them? Would you like to, if somebody's been ready to go? Think through the 10. How many of them are actually in law?
Not stealing,
Do not kill.
stealing, killing,
Bearing false witness to who?
In a court of law. Covenant.
2 of 10, roughly. Thou shalt not kill. Doesn't give any real explicit about what that is. My animal rights friends will tell us that it includes all living creatures. We don't. This is the irony of the Ten Commandments for the people who think we should put it up there because we mean it, is we
really don't.
We really don't, because we don't take those and translate those into laws.
And
To not honor your father and mother is a significant one. To not put the Lord your God first is not illegal. So what on earth are people getting at if they're saying it is the basis of our law, but actually isn't the laws? Well,
Right.
then it's
And
representative.
when you think about some of the laws that would be prioritized in other religious systems, blasphemy might be prioritized in a Muslim court of law, or from a Muslim theologian. So, for example, the Charlie Hebdo cartoons that made fun of Muhammad were, from the perspective of many Muslims, blasphemous. And they said, how is this legal? How can that be legal? Well, it's legal because in France and in the US and in most of the world, blasphemy is not a crime. It's a right. It's a right.
It's a right. It's not a crime. And this starts to get hard, right? Because then you end up with an argument around other issues where to some people a call that is a crime, to another person is a right. And what does one do? So this is the place that we find ourselves. So our question then is, what's the role of public, what role does faith play in a pluralistic secular democracy? How do citizens respond? And that goes to y'all. So, all right, this is the open discussion time. How do you currently navigate this? And do you have any examples in your own life of what's gone well or what you're currently struggling with around these issues? Where's the role of your faith in public life in a pluralistic society? How are you all dealing with it? We know it's a struggle for faith leaders. We know it's a struggle for politicians. And it's a struggle for all of us. So how are you all doing it? Yes. And if you're talking to this, only because we're recording this and we want to be able to... So if you don't want your thing recorded, just tell us and we'll cut it out.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Have you noticed God for a Change yard signs all over the country? Okay, so they're rather plentiful in the Green Bay area. And every time I drive past one, bike past one, walk past one, I ask myself, do they mean... It all depends on which word gets the stress or the emphasis, God or change.
God for a change is the line, right?
Right. And so, I question that, and sometimes I just feel like knocking on those people's doors and saying, like, can you explain to me what you intend to convey by having the yard sign?
Yes.
But, something that you just said, and, this kind of, I subscribe to a lot of legislative alerts from a lot of different organizations and stuff. Some faith-based, some non-faith-based. And sometimes, the sender will give you a sample text. And then, usually, in the beginning of the first paragraph of the sample email to send to your legislator, it'll say something like, you know, for that to be your opening line on a policy, on a legislative issue, just kind of makes me wonder.
Great thought. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Others? Things you're working on? Yes.
I'm just gonna say that my faith has really pushed me out to open my mind, open my heart, because I am called by my faith, as I know Jesus to be, and creator of all, the creator of all, to learn from each and every person. And especially the ones who have not yet been given a voice.
Nice.
I am meant to learn and listen to their stories, their sufferings, their struggles, and gain the insight, listen, understand what's going on in the lives of hurting people and the ones left out. Because the one thing maybe the Catholic Church has some people have touched on it, whatever you do to the least, you do. I was hungry, you fed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. Some of the Catholic faith kind of get that. But anyway, that's what I want to say. It really has pushed me out.
So good.
I'm a very ecumenical person. I have gained so much by listening to people of other faiths, other denominations. I am the richer person because of it, and that's what I thank God for.
Thank you.
It occurred to me, I used to be I was raised very, very conservative. I was raised in kind of conservative evangelical Protestantism.
He just gestured toward me.
And I remember having this thought way back then. It was right around before Oprah v. Hodges was passed, that I disagreed with gay marriage personally. I no longer do. I've evolved, but at the time, I disagreed with it personally. But I felt very strongly, even as a conservative Christian, that was not my role to tell anybody else that. Even if I felt it was sinful, that was my role, and certainly wasn't the government's role to tell somebody that wanted to marry somebody of the same sex that they couldn't. So I would say this is something that I want to, even now, just continue to invite Christians into Catholics, into people that have old, just traditional. They're not going to change their beliefs. My mother-in-law, for instance, she's not ever going to be just like okay with gay marriage and just get over it and think it's all fine and good. And honestly, I've kind of given up trying to convince her. It's not going to happen. But I feel like I should be able to convince her that, hey, Mom, it actually doesn't matter what you think. Just because you think something's sinful doesn't mean you might also think drinking alcohol is sinful. Does that mean that every liquor store in the county ought to be closed? To me, there's a pretty obvious line there.
Thank you.
That's great. A quick comment on that. Doug was speaking before about not having the government oversee sacraments.
Right.
Now, within Catholicism, marriage is a sacrament.
Yeah.
And so one of the arguments that I made back when the issue of marriage equality was before the Supreme Court was that you should not be giving the government authority over your sacraments. Yet the government does have authority over legal unions, and they should have that authority. The church should not. And so what I told religious people during that time is, you manage what you call your sacraments. Don't ask the government to do it. You want to have marriage be this? Within your church, that's fine. let the government manage the civil union and the rights associated therewith that it calls marriage. You don't have to call it that if you don't want. But the government says they will, and they should.
And this is one of the places, that particular issue, the United States has conflated the role of church life and public life. In a lot of countries, you'll have a civil wedding separate from a church wedding. In the United States, I as a person who's registered like a judge and a boat captain as a minister of the gospel, can oversee the solemnization of two people joining together. That's bizarre and makes no sense. I shouldn't be able to say, therefore, as a minister of the gospel, I present you husband and wife when God's brought together. Like, they should be I don't show up at people's house closings and say, I now, as a minister of the gospel, make sure that this house closing has happened and the house now belongs to you and not you. I'm not there at the DMV, but for some reason, I'm there at a wedding. Now, why we have done that, and in some states they let anyone perform a ceremony, and they've just handled it by saying anybody can do it, it doesn't have to be religious people, but in some places, I think Wisconsin, only subset of people, like in Minnesota where I live, only certain people can do it, and clergy are granted the privilege of solemnizing marriages. It's bizarre. So
They've just made it really easy to get ordained online.
Yeah, well, that's even worse, right? Like, it's even worse to say we're not going to actually solve the problem, we're just going to have it not be a real thing. In my view, it's bizarre. I'll tell you another situation, Joel, thinking about your story. This is a conversation I'm having with a friend of mine right now. He's very anti-abortion. He believes that supporting Democrats is paramount to killing children. Okay? So we have long conversations about this. And I said to him recently, if you believe that human life with all the full virtues of humanity begin at the moment of conception, actually sent him a video so we knew we were talking about the same thing. What we're talking about when sperm meets egg, that moment, before implantation in a uterus, that moment of cellular division. If you believe that is human life, with all the full rights of every other human life, right? Life begins at conception, human life. Then you cannot, in good conscience, support IVF, I suggested to him. Because in vitro fertilization takes fertilized eggs, holds them for implantation later, and if they're not used, they're disposed of. But that's disposing of human life. He's like, no, that's not what, that doesn't mean that. I'm like, no, it does. So we went back and forth. I said, here's some stuff to read. This is why the Pope speaks about IVF. He finally came around and said, okay, I agree. So he read it, didn't know, read it, and said, now I'm opposed to IVF. And then he said this, but I don't think we should make IVF illegal, but I do think we should make abortion illegal. So for him, and he's working it out, he said, I think that life begins there, but it's at a different stage once it's implanted in a uterus and begins that other stage of development. So abortion should be outlawed, but not IVF. So he's trying to work it out. I'm like, that's not going to go over well with your Catholic friends if you have any. Don't talk about this with them, right? They're going to push. And he's like, yeah, I know, but at some point we have to. So this is what's interesting, right? All of us have a little something like that where we're like, yeah, I think maybe this is how we're going to work it out. Now, I think that's better than where he was before, right? So I'm like, hey, at least we can talk about this issue, and he's not just, you're a baby killer to me. And I'm like, well, because now there's a bunch of people who are going to say because you support IVF. And then when Donald Trump said he wants the federal government to pay for IVF, that's the federal government, many in the anti-abortion movement, funding abortions. He's like, no, that's not what that means. He's like, okay, no. Then he takes all of his lines from Donald Trump, so he can't violate his Donald Trump commitment, so he can't be against it. But this is the kind of thing that people actually have to work through. And I think it's better for people who are going to take positions that are so clear to them to know them better.
It is better to know them better, and it is good the way you describe it, that he has his Donald Trump commitments.
Yes.
He has a paradigm that he's trying to maintain, and you're rattling his paradigm by asking him some questions that make him push the boundaries of it. problem is the direction he goes in that argument, because once that embryo has been implanted into the womb of the mother, now we're talking about the rights of a living, breathing, mature individual. We're talking about the rights of the mother. Yes. And if she does not have rights over bodily autonomy, one would have to say you don't have the most basic of rights. And I mean, you go back again into history of rights. The history, or the privilege, the right to take care of your own bodily autonomy is basic. It is fundamental. If you don't have that, you don't have much. And so I think he went the wrong way in trying to defend his paradigm. I have a similar example, and just, again, thinking of the logic of the way we tend to think when we're trying to defend something that we're losing a grip on. At one point, I was in a debate with one of my former colleagues. This is the sort of thing that made me eventually say, I can't keep doing this. But I was in a debate with a guy about the equal rights of women within the church, and I was arguing for full egalitarianism and women's ordination and things like that. And he was saying, but all these scriptures say it's supposed to be the man. And I said, okay, let's line up these scriptures and look at them with slave passages, because they're right next to each other. So scriptures about women and their roles within family and society are right next to scriptures about children and slaves. And so slaves obey your masters, women obey your husbands. They're right next to each other, right? And so I said, you don't believe these passages about slavery still have legitimacy at our time and place in the world. You would say they're on a trajectory toward the slave as your brother. They're showing some honoring, some diminishing of the slave master's authority, and so they're on a pathway toward the slave as your brother. The slave is free. And he said, yeah, that's how I've seen those. And I said, but you need to do the same thing with the ones about the women, because they're right together. It's like,
he said, no, I
so
don't.
put a trajectory. So his answer was, I think you're right. I guess I shouldn't be using the Bible to argue against slavery.
Yeah. No, this is where my friend went. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can see it coming out.
And it's like, no, dude, you just went the wrong way.
Yeah. It's like that old joke my dad used to tell when a guy goes to the doctor and says, doctor, it's really terrible, I died last night. The doctor said, no, you didn't die. He said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, let me ask you, do dead men bleed? He says, no. So he says, give me your finger. He pokes his finger, blood comes out. And then he goes, dead men do bleed. Yeah,
exactly.
Joke, right?
Yeah,
but that's literally what people, and this is where a faith commitment can be helpful to free someone's mind more broadly, or restricting it because you can't hold these contradictory ideas. Now, I will say, as a Protestant theologian, the Bible's great contribution to the world is not in its perfection. It is not useful on every topic, and on every topic it speaks. It is not clear, and on every topic on which it's clear, it's not on the same side of every issue when it is clear. So, to use the Bible is not something that we should just say, it simply says it in the Bible. Quick illustration, and we'll be done with this. I'll be done talking after this one.
Yeah, I've got one more.
No one I know has ever opened up the book of John and read Jesus saying to the disciples, go into Jerusalem and find a place to prepare for me to have the Passover. And then close the Bible, called Delta Airlines and said, book a flight to Jerusalem. I'm going to prepare a place for Jesus to have the Passover. It's a very clear command that Jesus gave to disciples to go and do. No one does that, because we know, no, he meant that to them. But then Jesus says to one guy, you must be born again, and we're like, well, that's true for everybody. Or he says to a group of people, you should love your neighbor, and yet we say, well, that's true for everybody. We universalize some statements of Jesus spoken to very specific disciples in a very particular moment in the passage right next to it, and then we stop, and the next one we say we clearly understand that that was meant for one particular person and not for all. So the choice to universalize or to particularize is something that we say, oh, we get that from context. But then when you bring up that very same context around what's the role of women, or what's the role of slavery, or what's the role of, I would say homosexuality, but that's not really even in there. So what's the role of any of this? And then it becomes universalized and particularized at the same time. So the Bible is great and beautiful, but it's not useful for the things that so much of our faith wants something to be useful for, and so we put the weight on the Bible.
There's another thing I hope you're hearing here. Doug and I have both had positions of recognized authority within churches or schools of thought. And we have changed our mind about stuff. I used to get phone calls from people saying, what do we believe about, what should I do about, and they just expected a quick answer. And the reality is they would believe or follow what I said. And so a few years ago I was in a conversation about voting in good faith. And I argued at the time that when Jean-Paul Sartre talked about bad faith, part of bad faith was to follow the some authority over you rather than your own conscience.
Wow.
And so to vote against your own conscience because some bishop or pastor or whoever else told you that's what you have to do, that's voting in bad faith.
Yeah.
Voting in good faith is to do what you know is right and to vote common good.
Yeah. Wow. Find it at votecommon.good.com. Don't miss the donate button. Thanks, y'all. Anybody else? Final comment? Final thought? Well, thank you. If you haven't signed the bus, we'd love to have you put your signature on the bus. We're going to be over in Appleton tomorrow running a candidate event. So if some of you have experienced a couple kinds of events. Tomorrow we stand with a candidate and do a bunch of stuff out at a public restaurant. It's super fun. So if that's the kind of thing you're up to, if you want a day trip to Appleton, we're there at 4:30. And we'd love to see you, and then we'll be back here. If you haven't yet gotten on our email list, there's little pieces of paper back there. You can go to votecommongood.com or put your name on the email there, and we will, as we like to joke, don't worry, we're not going to email you twice a week. We're not one of those groups. We do it 4 times a week, and I'm not kidding. We really do send you 4 a week. Because we don't want you to forget us. We want to stay in touch. We send you little updates, and we send you little things, and it's just a bunch, because we're friends now, so we want to stay in touch with you. So if you get on that email list, we promise we will stay in touch, and we hope you will stay in touch as well. Are we good? You guys want to go out with a song? You got a song? You got a song in your pocket? Sure. All right.
I got a song in my pocket.
You stand back there?
Yeah, I got it.
Let's go on up here. Question I always come back to after a session like this is, what do I do now? So what do I do? This is all great theory, but I've got friends, I've got people in my life that how do I talk to them? How do I affect change? And I don't have a great answer other than to do it and to not give up on your friends and your family members. The hardest thing for me is to just engage with curiosity and not just shut down immediately, because even if you think what they're spewing is just nonsense, people like to be listened to, and you give them some ability to talk, maybe they'll let you talk as well. And I keep coming back for the last year or so. This parable of Jesus has been rolling around in my head, and it's one of the boring parables. It's just a little snippet, and it's the parable of the mustard seed. He says the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, an
incredibly tiny seed, one of the smallest. And he says it gets scattered out and it takes root and it becomes this tree. And the bird is so big that the birds lodge in it. Calling it a tree is a little bit of an overstatement. It's really a shrub and it's kind of a weed actually. And I think Jesus used this on purpose. And I started to think about what's like the Western equivalent of the mustard seed, and it came to my mind. It's a dandelion. It's morning glory. It's helpful. It's useful, but it's kind of considered a nuisance, right? And what happens if you leave one dandelion in your yard? What happens?
Get a yard full.
In about a week, the whole block's covered in them, right? Just absolutely crazy. And so, the kingdom of God, Jesus says, it's like a little bit of yeast, a little tiny bit of yeast in a whole batch of dough. It's like a mustard seed. It's like a dandelion. So I want to encourage you, you don't have a super PAC, I imagine. If you do, please talk to us. You're not in Congress. You're not, right? I'm not either. What I'm doing right now, what Clay and I are doing right now, is kind of like our mustard seed. We're like, man, I don't know I'm doing much. Going around talking to groups of 10 and 12 people all over the country. But Jesus said that the mustard seed begins to spread, and that's how it happens. So, I finished this song just a couple months ago, and singing in church is called Dandelions. I want to live in a world where no one goes to bed hungry, no one falls asleep scared. I think it's possible to be the agents of change in a world gone crazy. And it's true, the healing of the world comes like the smallest seed, like a candle flickering in the wind. It's true, love only takes over like a pesky weed, like an earworm that you just can't forget, like dandelions taking over the pyramids. I think it's not unrealistic to melt all the guns down, make plowshares out of ballistics. I see temples and mosques full of outcasts, churches and shuls giving land back. What's right in front of your right hand? And it's true, the healing of the world comes like a maple seedling pushing through a crack in the stone. It's true, love only works like a pinch of yeast working its way through a batch of sourdough, like ivy covering over the Eiffel Tower. And the prophets say the world will be saved by a little child. God bless the grass, the scriptures are painted on the subway tiles in tenement halls. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. It's true, the only way to live is to lay it all down, let go and just surrender it all. It's true, wisdom is learning to lead and how to pierce through all the noise and just rest. just rest, like morning glories taking over the Brooklyn Bridge, like dandelions taking over the pyramids. I think it's possible to be the agents of change in a world gone crazy. Thank you, my friends. Hang out, do what you want, do it in peace. We love you.